Interested in all things psychology? You are at the right place. Here, we bring exciting and thought-provoking ideas. We travel into our minds and some things out of this world. Welcome to the Psychology Debrief.
Hi, and welcome back to the channel. I'm joined today by Dr. Beatrice Hayes, who's going to talk to me about some of the research that she's done on memes and emojis. Just in case there's anyone who isn't sure, can you give us a brief explanation as to what we mean by those two terms?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially emojis are pictograms that depict often emotions, but they can also depict broader thoughts or theory or household objects, anything to do with being a sort of human on Earth. They depict all kinds of different things around that. And where memes and GIFs are similar but slightly different is that they're also visual, so they're also kind of picture-based. Memes are static, whereas GIFs are a short video, like 2 seconds, like very, very short. And they often borrow from cultural references, particularly with memes and GIFs. There's often a comedic humor element to them, whereas emojis are typically a lot more broad in the kinds of emotions that they portray.
All right, so that's a pretty good definition, I think, for any elderly folk who are listening and have never come across those things before. Then
you have now.
Hopefully you're familiar with them. And I guess one question that it kind of naturally leads to is sort of, why are they so popular? I mean, people use emojis all the time when communicating via text message or maybe via email. Memes also just seem to be incredibly popular online. Is there any kind of psychological research or explanations as to why they've become so popular and the kind of functions they may have?
So there's more research around emojis. Memes and GIFs haven't been researched that much, but typically they kind of have the same kind of motivations behind why we use them. So importantly, they're a great way to communicate, and they're a really fun but also quick way to communicate. So within what we call the digital age, so since particularly social media kind of took off, people are very quick in the way that they socialize now. They're used to connecting and communicating rapidly. And particularly with busy lives and different things going on, and having a mobile phone always to hand, always being able to get in touch with people, being able to quickly communicate and to communicate clearly is really important nowadays. So being able to quickly send a thumbs up gets the point across. You know, I'm happy with whatever you've just said, or yeah, that sounds good. A thumbs up emoji just gets it out the way and quicker. So a big part of it is the sort of the ease and the quickness of communicating. But also, and this is where memes and GIFs come in a bit more as well. It's a way of connecting. It's a way of sort of bonding on similar interests, particularly with memes and GIFs, because they do make pop culture references. Again, they're funny. So that's another part of it. It's like a comedic and more fun, kind of chilled way of communicating. And also emojis in particular can be better in communicating tone. So I'm sure a lot of people have had that situation before where you've quickly sent a text and you've been, you know, shopping, or you're talking to someone and you've quickly got a reply and you say like, yeah, good. And it might come across really blunt and you're like, oh, I don't mean it like that. Whereas putting like a thumbs up and a smiley face is just as quick, but gets across that kind of chilled tone. So it doesn't come across as rude. So again, it can be really useful for kind of communicating tone a bit more.
Yeah, I think that point about how often the kind of tone of what you're trying to say gets lost in kind of using technology, I think is a really good one. I've had it lots of times where I'm like, no, I didn't mean it that way. And it's because without that kind of tone that often, you know, when we speak to each other, we put in emphasis on certain words or the way in which we speak about it could be much more lighthearted. You know, when we lose that, it can suddenly seem very, very different to the other person. And so for example, something that I often do, and we're going to talk about this in a little while anyway, because we're going to talk a little bit about the work you've done in an educational domain. But when I'm sort of writing emails to students, I'm always very careful to kind of make sure I'm kind of punctuating it with sort of smiley faces throughout, just to kind of ensure that there's no misrepresentation or miscommunication. But yeah, let's speak a little bit more about memes for a second, because something that you said to me, which I think was quite interesting, was about, it's not necessarily just a way of communicating. It seems to be something about revealing a sense of your identity, I suppose. It's sort of kind of saying, I like this kind of show or film, and in a way, hoping that maybe other people will connect with you on that sort of level.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that actually links with the research I'm interested in more broadly. So my kind of domain research-wise is online self-disclosure and how that looks in lots of different ways. And actually the way that we use particularly memes and GIFs, but also emojis, is actually a form of disclosure. It's a form of disclosing who we are, and it's a form of presenting the self. So for example, I am a huge Mean Girls fan. I remember when it came out and I was like, this is revolutionary. I love Mean Girls. And yeah, something that I typically do, especially with my friends, is we'll send each other like memes or GIFs related to Mean Girls. And that's something that we bond with as friends, because we all are of the same age. We all remember when Mean Girls came out and how it's become popular again now. And so it's nice for us to kind of disclose that we all like that film, and being able to kind of share humor or share interests in that film. And so absolutely, the way that we use memes and GIFs can really disclose a bit about ourselves and the way that we want to present ourselves. But also it can be quite useful for when there are situations where you're communicating with someone electronically and you want to get a point across, but you want to do it in a slightly light-hearted way. So you can send like a jokey meme or a jokey GIF that gets the point across. Like, I don't know if you've seen, I personally love this one, but it's David Tennant standing in the rain.
Yes, I know what you mean.
If you haven't seen, for anyone who's listening, if you haven't seen it, I beg you Google it, because it is jokes. But yeah, if someone's ever like said something that you're like, oh, I'm a bit, it's not the response I wanted, you could send like David Tennant in the rain and it gets the point across without being like, oh, I'm really upset, because it's possibly not that deep, but you can kind of communicate a bit more easily, and it can break the ice, or it can be a bit lighthearted, a bit funny, but the point still got across. So again, it's a way of self-disclosing, but doing that in a more creative manner. So yeah, I think it's super related to how we disclose about ourselves and how we want people to perceive us, or how we present the self as well.
Right. So I guess two things then in relation to what you said. The first is, given that part of why people might use memes and kind of quote things from sort of TV shows is to kind of bond with others. Maybe, and this is going to potentially descend into let's just talk about Mean Girls for the next 15 minutes. But yeah, if I said, let's go Glen Coco, am I using this correctly? Is this way of sort of disclosing I'm a kind of secret Mean Girls fan, and kind of therefore is giving me an opportunity to make friends, etc.? Is that a kind of correct way of using them?
Absolutely. Or it can make you more, and this really links nicely in terms of my research, but it can also make people seem a bit more human. If I'm talking to someone, we don't really know each other, but for whatever reason, I have their number and we text for whatever reason. If I kind of disclose that and then they replied with another meme or GIF that was Mean Girl related, then that instantly is something that you've then got in common, and it can kind of make you come across as a bit more friendly, or it can show that more softer side, or that more personable side of you.
I just want to return to this point about, you kind of said sort of soften, I guess, the sort of meaning behind things. I suppose what's kind of going on there, if I'm understanding you correctly, is that you kind of mentioned sometimes people can be sort of upset a little bit by what somebody has said. And rather than having a kind of big sort of discussion where you kind of disclose, hey, I'm really upset about this, it sounds a little bit like a meme offers the opportunity for people to kind of broach a subject, but in a kind of soft way that's perhaps going to reduce potential tension? Is that kind of what people suspect is kind of going on sometimes with self-disclosure through memes and stuff?
Mainly with emojis, because again, like I said earlier, the research into memes and GIFs is way less. There's not as much in that, but with emojis, yeah, absolutely. So we see in the research that emojis can just be a softer way of communicating an emotion, and particularly when, as I mentioned earlier, tone via digital communication can be really difficult to get right.
And so I'm wondering, because you've mentioned that you've done a lot of sort of research and reading around the area of memes and emojis and GIFs, and particularly your interest is in the use they might have in an educational domain. Now, on face value, some of our sort of listeners might feel somewhat abhorred at the idea that perhaps a meme has sort of educational value, but perhaps you can kind of outline a case for why these sorts of things potentially do have some use of in education, and what sort of use they actually do have.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it kind of really got me thinking when, so like I said, my kind of overall research domain is self-disclosure online, and I'm particularly interested in self-disclosing within an educational context. And what kind of sparked my thoughts was ages ago, I was making some lectures and I was like popping in some emojis and some memes and GIFs and whatever, just to kind of make it a bit more lighthearted. And I thought, oh, I wonder, you know, how many I should put in, or am I getting the tone right? And I sort of looked online and realized that no one's really talked about it. So I thought, okay, that's interesting. So from a personal experience, I get quite good feedback from using, I don't go crazy, but for using a few emojis or a few little visual things like that within my teaching content. And so I was interested in kind of exploring that a bit further, because when we think about, particularly with the emoji research and the very little research that there is with memes and GIFs, everything that we've just said, you know, communicating, connecting with others, showing that you've got like a personal side, etc., those are all aspects that also relate to education, and particularly that lecturer and student relationship. And there's tons of research that outlines that the connection, the feeling of the relationship, the perception of a relationship between a lecturer and a student is really important and impactful upon that student's journey through university. So I was thinking, okay, that's interesting. When COVID happened and everyone moved to online teaching, and suddenly we were communicating with students through MS Teams or Zoom or more via email and things like that, suddenly everyone was forced into communicating digitally. And we saw an increase in how emojis and visual things like that were used to communicate. Because of course, when you're doing a lecture or something, a classic thing when you're teaching online is, oh, if that made sense, can you just give me like the thumbs up option or something like that? So that's what made me really think, okay, well, everyone's using it in some way. How actually might using emojis, memes and GIFs successfully or unsuccessfully, how might that impact this relationship between lecturer and student for the better or for the worse? So that's kind of where I got my inspiration. And when I was doing the reading, I thought, well, these things can apply to an educational context. So that's what kind of sparked my interest. And so that kind of led me on to then conducting a couple of studies to explore it.
Yeah, and I think what you said was really interesting, because this is what I find really interesting about psychology sometimes, is that I sometimes use cultural references like GIFs and maybe some memes and that kind of stuff in my lectures, but I never really considered the potential value they might have. I just did them because I just felt like that helped me explain something to students, and I never really thought about the broader underlying kind of functions that they might have. But what you said kind of makes a lot of sense. You know, you talked about you know, breaking down sort of barriers between students and staff. I mean, every year when we have kind of students come in, at the very beginning, they always are sort of sir, and I'm just like, please don't call me sir. Like when someone calls me sir, I'm looking over my shoulder thinking there must be someone else behind me. And I guess in a way, I never thought about it, but you're probably right. In many respects, by disclosing, I like to use a lot of kind of Simpsons related things, because I love The Simpsons. I used to teach Freud at points, and I used to use Marge, Homer, and Ned Flanders as the examples of the id, the ego, and the superego. But yeah, you know, I never thought, apart from, I thought it was a decent heuristic that people could understand, that actually it might help break down barriers for students to realize, hey, this person's not actually that dissimilar to me, and therefore might make me more approachable. Because you're right, you know, one of the key things is that having a kind of relationship with your teachers and feeling like you can approach them and ask them questions is going to really help you educationally. So that's, I think, a really interesting kind of point that I've never pondered upon sort of in any kind of serious level of detail, but when you said it, it makes a lot of sense. I am wondering, however, is there a kind of drawback sometimes to these things? I can't imagine necessarily it's just everyone, let's just go crazy and embed memes and emojis throughout our kind of communication style, throughout our lecturing and teaching. So is there kind of a boundary to this sort of issue? Can it sometimes do more harm than good, perhaps?
Yeah, those are all like such important points. And yes, is the short answer. So essentially, I've been working on a couple of studies with some fantastic research assistants, one of which we just looked at whether engagement was associated with whether a lecturer used just text or text with emojis, text with GIFs, or a combination of all of them. And we found that engagement scores were highest for those who, for these stimuli where all of them were used. So when there was text, but also emojis and GIFs, etc. So just looking at that, you'd say, oh, great, you know, looks like students do find them more engaging. We know that engagement is associated with better understanding, better relationship with lecturers. We know that that's associated with a better experience at university. Great, great, great. But like you said, what about the potential drawbacks, or what actually is it about emojis and memes and GIFs that is the engaging bit, and is there a disengaging bit? So to explore that, I actually conducted interviews with university students, and my research assistant, who was fantastic, she actually conducted those interviews, and then we coded and we looked at the themes together. And it was really interesting because from our analysis, we can see that yes, students do like it when emojis, memes and GIFs are used, because it helps with understanding the content, particularly at university, where content can be quite theoretical and quite dense and quite confusing. Being able to use very simple examples, or being able to make links with cultural similarities, like for example, the id, ego and superego that you said with The Simpsons, yeah. Perfect. That's a great way to simplify something that could be quite theoretically confusing. So it's great for that. Students also said that it was great for retaining and remembering information, particularly when they were revising. Because again, when they're in the middle of an exam, they might go, oh yeah, Homer Simpson. And you know that they'll remember that, and so it's easier for learning. And also that it was great for realizing that lecturers were actually normal human beings. And a lot of the participants said that it made them feel like if they did have a question, or if they were concerned or confused by something, they could actually go and communicate to that lecturer. It made them seem less scary. So those were the good things. But there are some drawbacks. So the main thing that participants mentioned within the interviews was that it can go a bit too far. And if a lecturer is relying on them a bit too heavily, it can come across as unprofessional. So there's that real balance, because they want you to be, the students want you to be personable, and they want to know that you're a real human being. But at the same time, they're paying a lot of money, and they're here to learn. So they don't want it to come across like a very immature kind of learning session. So it's about kind of getting that balance right in terms of making sure that you're still being professional whilst showing a side to yourself. Equally, students mentioned that it's about understanding and using emojis, for example, was a big one, appropriately. So not being sarcastic and like putting a thumbs up to be like, you know, being sarcastic, students don't like it, understandably so. And actually that does the complete opposite in terms of making a lecturer seem personable. If they feel like they're being sarcastic, it makes them appear the complete opposite. So the key thing was, it's great, but you have to get the balance right in terms of professionalism. So those were the kinds of main positives and drawbacks around using emojis, memes, and GIFs.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, I think probably a fair way to look at it would be these kind of things, emojis, memes, etc. If you think that they have a place in helping a student understand a complex idea, then perhaps, you know, consider using it. But if you're only including it for kind of comedic element, it could potentially come at the consequence of you coming across less professional and more as you're just here for a kind of comedy act, so to speak. So perhaps consider that, first of all, the educational value before you start just throwing in memes just for the sake of it. Is that kind of a fair way of looking at how students saw it?
I think that's a really fair way of looking at it. And also, you know, when you're being sarcastic or when you're taking the mick, like, it's fine to have a little bit of rapport and a bit of a joke with your students, of course, and students want to see that. So that's fine. But I think it's about pitching that appropriately. Whereas if it was for an educational purpose, for example, I taught master's stats this year, and in one of my lectures, I was talking about multicollinearity, and I used the Spice Girls to become one, like, GIF to explain multicollinearity. And loads of the students, there was actually a couple of students afterwards who said, like, that actually, for the first time I got it, because they were like, they actually like got it. So you can still use it in master's level or higher, you know, different kinds of modules, but like you said, it's about using it appropriately. So educational purposes is always the best route to go down. That doesn't mean you can't be a bit funny, but you need to read your audience and know if your students are going to appreciate it or not. I think that's the kind of balance. It's just about, you know, knowing your audience, I guess, is like the key part of using them successfully.
Well, Beatrice, thank you very much for speaking today about memes and emojis and their function potentially in an educational system. Before you go, I have decided to put your claims, so to speak, to the test about the value of emojis. So, have you ever considered the idea of having an exam that is purely emoji based?
I had not, but what a revolutionary idea, Sam Fairlamb.
I mean, well, this is precisely why we have this YouTube channel. We come up with fantastic ideas on a fortnightly basis. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a real life experiment with you right now. And also it's going to have the hallmarks of all classic psychological experiments. There is a small sample size is the first thing. Sample size of 1, you're the experimental group. I'll find a random student who will do a non-emoji version of this quiz as the control condition. And what we're going to see is whether having an emoji format of an exam means that you can fare better in getting a higher score. So I sent you just before this recording a document with some emojis that they are there to represent either famous psychologists or famous psychological experiments. There are 6 of them. Can you see them?
I can.
Okay, so going from 1 through to 6, let's start with the first one. Do you think you can name either the famous psychologist or famous psychological experiment?
Yes. So I recognize the first one. So this is Stanford Prison Experiment.
Okay, well, we've done well so far.
Who was, I can't remember his name. I met him. Oh my goodness, what is his name?
Zimbardo.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. I met him once. I met him about 10 years ago at a conference. Well, it was like a sort of a conference, but yeah.
Okay, well, you've done well so far on getting the first one. So maybe your hypothesis that emojis have a value is working. So what about number 2? Can you get number 2?
That's Pavlov's dogs, right?
Yes, that is correct. You're rounding the bases very quickly. 2 out of 2 so far. What about number 3?
I'm not actually sure about this one. So it's a mixing bowl and a bee, a spoon and a bee.
Sorry, this is very amusing for me. So,
God. I don't think I know this one. What is it? I don't know. I give up.
you said it's a bowl and a bee.
Yeah, a spoon and a bee. What is that? It's a bowl, like cereal, like a. I don't know what that is.
I mean, you're kind of there. You're sort of saying it over and over again. You just haven't put it
Oh,
together.
Bolby! It's Bolby. You're kidding.
Yeah, it's Bowlby.
Stop it. Attachment.
Yeah, Bowlby attachment theory.
Stop it.
Okay, what about
Brilliant.
4?
Oh, that's like little Albert and the mouse and the rat.
Yeah,
White mouse. He was frightened.
Yeah, fear conditioning with the white rat and the loud noise. What about number 5?
That's the zap zap. Is that Milgram that did that? Electric.
Yeah.
Zap zap. I'm doing better at this than I thought, because
I actually thought you would crash and burn. I mean, this whole experiment was designed for you just to crash and burn.
Literally.
I've got egg on my face here.
I honestly, when you said it, I was like, oh, help me, because you forget about all these people if you're not, unless you're lecturing about them and you're talking about them specifically. When you're concentrating on your own research topic, you kind of forget. So I was like, oh my goodness, are they going to be like really obvious ones and I'm just not going to know them? But I'm absolutely chuffed with myself, to be honest.
And do you think you can get the 6th one and make it a full house?
I think I know the experiment. I don't know. I can't remember who did it, but it's the one with the basketball and they're like, it's about attention. So you focus on the basketball and then the gorilla, like.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the attention study where you're supposed to pay attention to the basketball players and then people don't notice the gorilla that walks through the video. You have got 6 out of 6 on this clearly highly validated psychological quiz. And perhaps is an example of how we could further use emojis in an educational domain. I'm sure we'll be having students up and down the country now all emailing their sort of teachers and departments saying, I only will do exams if they're presented in emoji format. They clearly have been highly beneficial, at least in terms of this very poorly designed study. And I think on that bombshell, we shall call it a day. Thank you very, very much, Beatrice, for coming on and sharing your wonderful work on emojis and memes.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been so much fun.
Thank you for watching the Psychology Debrief. If you have any suggestions for new topics, quizzes, or any other content psychology related, feel free to get in touch via email or Twitter. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Bye!